Hi, my name is Isabella Johnston, the Intern Whisperer, and today's tip of the week is focused on leadership skills. Let's talk about team building. One way is to set healthy precedents for your team to follow. A good leader is the glue that holds everyone together. By cultivating an environment of collaboration and accountability that focuses on the benefits of teamwork, leaders can encourage employee growth on a collective level. Make sure to lead by example and collaborate with your team in a way that works for everyone so that you can give your people opportunities to practice fair play. If your team understands the impact that quiet quitting has on all employees of the organization, they're more likely to be mindful of their actions and behaviors. So welcome, Monica Quiñones, to the Intern Whisper Show. Monica is also a community builder and a therapist at ABA Alliance Therapy. I am so excited to have you on the show because we're going to learn a lot about mental wellness and what employers should be able to do, but we'll talk a little bit about autism. I know I really was really grateful when I met you down at Orlando Game Space, shameless plug for them, that you also have a specialization in that area.
I do, and thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited. I am so happy to have you. Okay, so I always kick off my show with 5 words that describe you and why those 5 words. And I know that you shared them with me in advance, so if you get stuck, I can help you.
Awesome. Yes. I have notes too, so if I look down, that's why. I'll start with creative, a listener, detail-oriented, loyal, and outspoken.
Okay, so I get the idea of a listener because of your
Right.
profession. That's for sure, but maybe you have another reason. But why do you say creative?
I say creative because it's just something in my blood from just being very young. And I always thought my career path would be something more in the arts, visual arts or photography or things in that route. But what I like to do, because I'm so passionate about psychology and mental health and now ABA, I incorporate my creative juices as much as possible. So it's just something ingrained in me. My mom is also an artist, so I think it's just something I grew up with.
Nice.
Mhm.
I think that there's also art therapy, right?
There is, yeah.
Yeah, so that plays well into that.
Art is therapy, just in general.
Oh gosh,
I
yeah.
mean, it is in so many different ways. Music is therapy. Animal therapy is also super, super popular and so effective. I've heard, from several clients. So, yeah, it's very therapeutic.
Just about anything you love can be therapy.
True.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
So detail oriented.
Yes.
Let's say. So why did you use that word to describe you?
Because I tend to hone in on the details, whether it's in my personal relationships or just in my work ethic and the things that I create or the things that I put forth in my work. I try and be as thorough as possible, and I feel like my expectations tend to also kind of hone in on those small things. So in my role, I have to be very detail oriented. In what we do as behavioral therapists, we have to be very detail oriented because those can make the difference.
Right. You have
for
to
the
take
service.
notes, right?
We do. We have to take notes. We create behavior plans, which are customized to each client and all their very specific needs. So it's very important to look at the details, and just ABA in general, right, is supposed to hone in on the very specific behaviors that we're observing. So it's all about details.
Loyal. Why loyal?
I feel like if you were to ask any of my friends, one of the qualities that I have, it's loyalty, whether it's a company that I am employed with, whether it's a friend that I keep close. I feel like that's something that I have stayed true with always. And I think it's something I've just learned from the people who have been influenced to me, is how important loyalty is and keeping ties close. And so, yeah, it just came to mind when I was thinking about how I would describe myself.
So outspoken.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting because to me, I'm thinking, well, maybe it's related to causes or something, but why that word?
That word, I think, because as far as I've thought about my growth from childhood to young adulthood to, now I'm almost going to be 30, I think that's something that's grown in me. And especially, I mean, when I think about in the lens of my work, and I consider myself an advocate for my own clients and for my own families. And so you have to be okay with having those conversations. You have to be outspoken. And in the nature of our world right now, I think it's important that if you're passionate about something, or you have something to say, that you feel comfortable with, having these conversations with other people, and being okay to kind of stand up and just be outspoken in general. So I think just in the nature of how I've grown, that's something that I would definitely say that I'm very comfortable with speaking my mind for the right reasons.
Yeah. Is there a particular cause that is super important to you?
Always bullying, and kind of thinking about that aspect in the education system, or just with children in general. I've always been passionate, and I've wanted to kind of explore more working with just women, and of course with this field that I've been introduced to for the past 7-8 years. I'm very passionate about just working with kids, and especially children with autism and special needs, and there's a lot of advocacy that's needed, especially when it comes to their education, when it comes to services, and just a lot of the role, even the role as of a behavior analyst. We are little advocates for our clients, because we have to fight so hard to get services for our kiddos and keep them. All the services are approved by insurance companies, and so there's a whole process behind advocating for why they need it, and all the paperwork involved, and so it's very important.
Yeah, I was a public classroom teacher,
Mm-hmm.
well acquainted with what it is that you're describing,
Yeah.
Because there's not many people that will fight for the kids,
Right.
And
Right.
if a parent isn't available, then
Right.
it really ends up being the teacher.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
So, what is ABA behavior? What is that?
Yeah. So ABA stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. So it is a empirically supported field, and it's in layman's terms, really what we do is we observe human behavior, and we try to identify why are these things occurring, right? In the lens of working with my population, we want to identify what are the behaviors that are occurring, and what are the proper replacements, right? We want our kids specifically to thrive. We want our kiddos to feel as independent as possible. We want them to be able to communicate. And so just the general sense of ABA is to look at these behaviors, identify where are the deficits, and trying to replace them and teach, so that our children can be functional human beings and have meaningful relationships, and be able to support themselves as much as possible. And also incorporating our families, and getting them to a place where they feel really confident that they can also be a support at home, across settings, things like that.
So when I think about applied behavioral analysis, I had never heard of that term when I was a teacher.
Yeah.
I feel like it must be a fairly, I don't know, maybe 5 or 7, maybe 10-year-old
It's
term.
a young science. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's super helpful. But when you're talking about making or identifying these changes, is it only done in a therapy session, or do you end up going out and observing the child? Because it sounds like you work with predominantly children. Do you observe them in the classroom, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it depends on company, but as for my experience, I've worked with companies that go across settings. So we can provide services in home, in school, across community. I've gone to theme parks, I've gone to dentist appointments, I've gone really wherever I'm needed. And then, you have your clinic settings as well. So it can be done in any setting. And it's really dependent on the client's needs.
So and again, I'm just trying to make sure
Yeah.
I understand it and I can
Mm-hmm.
explain it to our listeners. And because sometimes, predominantly, people listen to the show. It always helps to see, and we offer our show on video.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're there in that setting, and I find it interesting that you said the dentist. So you're working with a child, and when something happens, let's say it's a behavioral outburst, or maybe it's that they hit somebody,
Right.
those are the types of behaviors I believe you're talking about, and helping the child to see, no, that is not good behavior. How would you do something differently? Is that the scenario that you're helping with?
It could be. And I think what it's, yes, it's a young science. I didn't hear about it until I was in my senior year in college.
Mm-hmm.
So it is hard to understand, and so is autism in general, right? I think um, trying to explain it in the example that you gave me, that could be a potential scenario. And what we really want to look at is where, you know, if for your example, a child engages in aggression towards somebody,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we want to look at that behavior, right? They aggress towards somebody. What is the reason behind that? Is it because there is a deficit in communication where we can teach our children to try and communicate, I am uncomfortable, or I this is an unpleasant experience for me, right? And accompanying that with the appropriate coping skills that it would require for them to get through a appointment like that if it is
Mm-hmm.
aversive for them. So it really is dependent on the, whatever we come down to as for the function of that behavior. But that's really the key of what we're trying to do is we see a behavior, we're not jumping to conclusions, we're breaking all of these observations down into, this is what we observed, these are the conditions in which the environment, what is occurring in the environment, and how do we provide that appropriate replacement for that maladaptive behavior if it is occurring, right? So aggression obviously is something that we want to focus on if that's, what the child requires. And so how can we help this child communicate better in that situation where they might feel they get to that point?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and there is just such a variety of behaviors that we focus on, and again, there's just so many scenarios where it could be look very different. It could be even as simple as going to an appointment and just kind of getting through the duration of the appointment. It could be just the skill of sitting in a waiting room and waiting for you to be let into an appointment, even as simple as waiting skills like that.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
We take so many of these things for granted
Yeah.
as an adult, and then we don't realize that there is a growth pattern that has to take place
Mm-hmm.
if you have a child that has some special needs like autism
Right.
or something else, just to be able to really wrap your head around it. Now, as an employer, I know we're talking about children. I have found, because I've had several people with Asperger's and also autism work with me, one of the things that I noticed is that for the most part, they've all had extremely high, what I call ethic meters. They are, no, that's a bad word. You can't say that. And they'll call me out. I don't have a problem with that, honestly, because
Mm-hmm.
I find it a good thing. It's a good thing. But they'll also read things. They have very high, for the ones that I've worked with, have had super high intelligence. And they are very good with grammar and being able to understand that. One time we were playing a game online because we work remotely,
Okay.
and the game was two truths and a lie. And the person working with us said, "No, I'm not going to do that." I said, "Is it because we have to tell a lie?" He said, "Yes."
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay, but I want you to stay. Why do I want you to stay?" And he understood it. And he said, "Because, I don't have to participate, but it's team building and understanding my teammates." And I went, "Okay, yeah, then you're
Right.
staying." So there's a line where they'll say yes, as long as I don't have to do something that is wrong, but they do understand the other's side of the benefit, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, to bounce back off of that, I feel that um kind of what you're describing, I think I would label as that rigidness, right? I'm not going to do this because there's this and there's this, and these are the two
Boundaries.
yeah, exactly. And how amazing is it that your employee wanted to make sure you understand what their boundaries were?
Mm-hmm.
And I do work with children, but children eventually grow into adults. And so why is it so important for why is our work so important is because we want them to get to that position where if they need to label what their boundaries are, they can, and they can identify that and also understand others' point of view as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so all of these things that we learn as typical human beings through having conversations, through being in school and being in social settings, and things that we just tend again to take advantage of, that we learn naturally. Sometimes they need more practice. Sometimes our kiddos need personal examples, and that's something I love to do, especially when I have older clients who are getting into those conversations of what do they want to do when they you know meet high school, and then they go further beyond that. What do they picture for their own lives? And so it's super important for us to create those scenarios. And I do a lot of role play when I'm in therapy, if it's possible for my client, if they're at that level of understanding where I give them so many of my personal examples. What would you do if you were in this scenario? Or, hey, hypothetically, if this were to happen, what's the best way to have a solution to this problem? And so we get into all those little nuances. Um, but I think when it comes to employment, and what I really think that everyone needs to be reminded of is they call it autism spectrum for a reason,
Mm-hmm.
because you can have individuals who you know you you might sense that difference in them. You might kind of have that interaction, and you have maybe some kind of social interaction where you'll notice that something wasn't communicated in a way that you expected, or and there's just so many different preferences that people have, right? You can go online and you can Google what are typical symptoms of autism, right? But that is not for everybody. That is not something that you will see in every single person. And that's something to understand is there might be individuals who aren't outward about this label that they've been given, or this diagnosis. And I think we need to be very conscious of also, uh, not feeling like we have to be intrusive into that kind of insight, but also understanding that everyone has strengths, just like any employee that you're looking to hire. I think it's trying to cultivate an environment and a culture in your company that definitely highlights their strengths as an individual and as an employee for whatever the position that you're, looking for. And also, hopefully and potentially, you get to have rapport with this person enough to get to know what their barriers are as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say that's important for, if you have an employee with autism, but also, I mean, any employee in your company. It's super important to understand and cultivate that kind of culture in your company that allows for people to feel like they can, really be empowered with their strengths, and understand their weaknesses, and, you know, hopefully improve on them. If not, then you're able to kind of have a team that works really well together even through those differences.
So at the at the Orlando Science Center,
Mm-hmm.
the Sparks STEM Fest, there was a woman from a group called I think it's Ablement Group, and it used to be 26 Resources,
Okay.
I think. I remember the other name. They just rebranded apparently. And they work with individuals that have different types of disabilities. And one of them specifically is autism and also Asperger's. They try very hard to help them find jobs that are adults. And that was an interesting conversation that I had with her too, because it's the same thing. They're trying to get a group of people so that they can be reliant on themselves. They would be contributing to, our economy and also our just our world and communities. But there's so many employers that will see them, individuals with disabilities, whether it's wheelchairs or mental or something else, like they're blind or they're deaf, and just see it as, no, I don't want to have to spend that time
Right.
with them. And that's what I really would love to do, is to be able to make sure that we're educating them, employers,
Yes.
as to, okay, there's a lot of people out there, and they would be some of the most loyal employees. Like you described that trait as one of yours. They would be loyal. They would definitely be caring of that organization. And they bring something that's, I think, richer to that employer than what they could have imagined in a culture that's built around what I would call true inclusion and true accessibility. So I would love us to be able to, even though you're talking about children, what is it that adults need to know, period, whether you're a teacher or you're the parent of a child that doesn't have that? What do they need to know about people with autism? Because that ethics meter, I love it. I
Yeah.
absolutely love it. That's what I call it. Is it okay? They're really high on the ethics meter. They're going to make sure that we are doing a good job.
Mhm.
They also are very good about managing their time, from what I've seen, and making sure that they hit the deadlines, and extremely literal. If I say something, I really have to make sure I'm being very cognizant of my words, my word choices, because they are taking it exactly how I say.
Mhm.
So I think as employers, they should be aware of that. Are there other tips or suggestions you might have, just for people that are trying to work better with a group of people that they have very little knowledge of?
Well, before I answer, I have a question for you, Isabella.
Okay.
You described your relationships with your personal like employees who have autism. How did you know that they have this diagnosis?
They were really open with me.
Okay.
Yeah, they actually put it on their application,
Okay.
and they wanted people to know that. And I find that super refreshing. On
Mm-hmm.
the second point, though, I was a teacher. So not everybody is a teacher and gets exposed to the masses,
Right.
right, in the classroom. So I had a lot more exposure through teaching, but I also know that there was more openness. Otherwise, I think that people just kind of go, well, they're really odd. What's wrong with them? And
Right.
that's not the right
That's the
attitude.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really the problem. And when I was thinking about, how I think about if I was in that position, or what is something I want people to kind of take away, is that um, the field of ABA is very young, and so
Mm-hmm.
and even the research and the idea of what autism is still something that is evolving. It's still something that's not completely understood. So I think, like you mentioned, people have an interaction with an individual and they say, "Ooh, they're odd. Why is there so much closed-mindedness around that interaction?" And so, first of all, individuals and employers should not look at an application and say, "Oh, autism, well, let's write them off." That's the first problem.
Yeah, that's a problem,
That's a
because that
huge problem.
violates equal opportunity, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, one of the words I had put down, I had just put unassuming, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't look at an application if the person is even, as open as who you've experienced to work with, to say that they have autism. And then beyond that, to assume that that means that they have any, like, that they're set back in any way. To assume that their intelligence level it is measured, it has any deficits, like all of those things are misconstrued. I think for some reason, when somebody thinks of autism, they think that it has anything to do with lowered intelligence. That's not the case at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what people really need to do is check themselves at the door and say, okay, when I read that word, or when I find out that an individual that they know has it, what is their first thought? Where does their mind go? What are the assumptions behind that? And really, employers need to kind of take a step back and say, "Ooh, if I received an application and a person was open enough to kind of put that is something that they, that is a label they carry with them, where does their mind go, and how does that influence their decision?" And really, again, it's about creating cultures that are inclusive, but really inclusive. And what does that mean? That just means taking the time and the effort to build relationships with your employees, and also allowing them and making them feel comfortable enough to be open to each other as co-workers, right? And knowing that just because an individual has autism doesn't mean that they're awkward. Just because they have autism doesn't mean that they may have social inappropriate behaviors. That's not the case for every single person. And I see that every day. I have, kiddos who really you would not know that they carry this diagnoses with them. They may have some, areas where they need improvement, but it is not obvious in every person. You find, I mean, I'm on Instagram, and I have, I run our company Instagram, and I see these reels, and I see individuals who are 40, 50 years old getting diagnosed at that age.
Wow.
And you're just like, wow, so why does the label matter when it comes to employment? Why?
Well, I can think of one way that's positive. It's there to protect the person, to make sure that they're not discriminated against, but it's also very hard to prove, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it always kind of circles back to that, because again, I think it depends on the individual themselves too, right? If you're working with an adult with autism, it is their choice to be open with you and to kind of let their history with that diagnosis, right? Not everybody has access to therapy. Not everybody has access to social groups and to social skills training and all of these things. So you don't know the steps that they took to get to that position, to feel even comfortable enough to apply for a job, or to go to that event, or to meet these people, meet a new individual too. So, I think it's just checking your biases at the door, just like you would with any other, group, unrepresented group, and realizing that you have to really, really work on not seeing that label as a negative, right? Or something that, oh, it's just so much effort to work around. Like that's just not the case at all. And so it's really looking at yourself, and as an employer, and as a coworker too, and saying, am I looking at this person differently because of this diagnosis, right? If I work with somebody, and even with my own kiddos, I am very clear about my expectations of them. And I am very transparent about my perspective. And I love to work on debriefing, which is, following an episode or following a difficult moment, I talk about the entire process from start to finish. What is it that happened? Why did it happen? How do we, change it for the next time? How does it make me feel? Right. So I like to incorporate a lot of those things as well, even though applied behavior analysis is very, very much about the topography of the behavior, right? The field is evolving, so it really is not about mental health at all. The mentalistic is something that is not traditionally incorporated in behavior analysis at all. But we're treating human beings, we work with human beings, and so our feelings, our emotions, those affect the way we behave sometimes. And so I refuse to ignore it. And I know there's just a lot of research and a lot of avenues that therapists are also considering to use that and incorporate that into their therapies. But we just need to be human beings, and we need to be very considerate of, again, our differences, and learn how to just incorporate them into the workplace.
So there's this statistic when I was working with NAMI, National Association,
Yes.
National Alliance on Mental Illness,
Mm-hmm.
and in Greater Orlando. And the statistic was 1 out of 5 has a mental disability. And I thought, man, that's a lie. I think it's 4 out of 5 has one. And there's so many people that don't disclose because of whatever perception
Exactly.
that's going to be assumed about them.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I flip that even further based on what we're saying is, so if we have applied behavioral, let me make sure I'm saying this exactly right, the way that you had said it, applied behavioral, where is it? In here, behavior analysis, I'm going, well, it needs to be the people that don't have those behaviors also, or don't have those disabilities, going through the same training, just so that we can be more inclusive and make sure we're being more empathetic to the people around us. It seems like we're focusing on only people with those disabilities, when it's the rest of us that need to be, okay, if that was my kid, how would I want them to treat me?
Exactly.
If that was me, how would I want them to treat me? And really put ourselves in that place to be more inclusive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a great way to put it, because always when we experience things ourselves, it really gives us a new perspective, right?
Yes.
So, not every employer is a parent. So how are they going to put themselves in that kind of, in the shoes of a parent if that was my child? But if we just take a step back and say, well, when I had a deficit in a certain area, what if that one person didn't give me a chance because of that deficit?
Right.
So even as basic as that, and it just maddens me so much to, I know that statistic is high. And I mean, I don't know if it's accurate, but I was just reading through a website, kind of getting a little bit of background, and they said something like 90% of individuals with autism are unemployed. Like, the
I would
employment,
believe
and
that.
it's just like, wow, and it's just, they're just fighting against a label that,
There's so much education that has to happen. So that was
absolutely.
one of the things that me as a startup, and
Mhm.
being able to help people that need jobs, and specifically I focus on internships. I went, what if we took away all of the variables that allow us to see somebody, whether it's see their name or see what they look like, whether it's gender, race, ethnicity, they look different. Why is it, they're acting different? What if we took all of those things away, so that you're really making a decision to hire somebody based on their cognitive skills, what's in their head and what's in their heart? And so
Mhm.
that's where I sat there and I went, okay, I can solve that problem. I really believe that I understood that because I have my deep experience in education and also in the HR field. So
Mhm.
that's where I built Employers for Change, is to be able to say, so let's look at people with no labels.
Mhm.
Let's look at, can they do these things in the job?
Right.
Let's look at 6 core cognitive skills. Then let's look at culture fit, because that algorithm is there to strip away the things that people look at and go, oh, Quiñones, I bet she speaks Spanish. No,
Right.
I don't think so. And then, oh, she's a woman. No, I don't think so. Right.
Mhm.
So we don't want to see those things. So after people get matched, then we actually, in our platform, we allow the employer to send out a skills assessment, again, looking at cognitive skills in the head. And then when it comes back, that's when you are actually meeting the people that are the best, most qualified candidates, because it's no longer based on seeing the resume. You don't see the resume until you've been matched and assessed. You don't get to see anything, their face, nothing, until you've been matched and assessed.
Yeah.
Because I feel so strongly about like what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because individuals with disabilities, veterans, and then because they're used to working in large groups of people, and that's usually an enterprise company. And then there's internationals that can speak, more than one language. I go, are you kidding? You're already smarter than me because you can do this.
Right.
You're
So many
able to do that.
benefits to that. Mhm.
So those groups, when you hire those groups, they will stay with you and they will do the most excellent job. And people should pay attention to those groups is really what I advocate for.
Yeah. And that all sounds wonderful. And I think, how do we go beyond that and ensure that when they do get that resume and when they do enter the culture of the company, does it sustain?
Mm-hmm.
Are you employing the individuals who are as collaborative,
Mm-hmm.
who support that notion that you are trying to be as inclusive as possible?
Mm-hmm.
You have to make sure that's just within the fabric of the culture of the company that you're trying to grow, that is that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everything has to support that. So it all sounds great. I think it's about sustaining that
Right.
mentality and really allowing for the person to feel supported and to be able to contribute. And again, I think about accessibility even before getting to the point of applying for the job. One quality that is common, but again, it's not necessarily every single individual. But when I see it all the time, a lot of my children have very, very very strong interests in certain things. And so if that happens to be the quality of an individual with autism, and um, do they have accessibility to know even what possibilities of employment could they have in the future?
So what type
you
of
know
things do you mean?
so I mean, just in general, I have a kiddo who loves the solar system, loves
Mm.
space, and it has been his core interest for years and years and years and years. What if he wants to be an astronaut? How is he going to get there in the future? What
Mm-hmm.
kind of accessibility will he have to get to that position where he potentially could, be employed with NASA?
Mm-hmm.
How does he get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do children, then young adults, then adults get accessibility to the training that's needed for getting to that job,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it makes me think of, there are vocational services, there are like occupational therapy, there is eventually job training opportunities, I'm sure. And I have volunteered with different conventions and different like family services, and I know that there are companies out there that do that. But again, if employers truly want to incorporate more inclusion, maybe we do events that invite individuals to come and explore what are the different opportunities for jobs or for clubs or for socialization that incorporate their interests. And so just thinking about that, and where are the opportunities there, because again, accessibility is huge.
You're right.
Right? And when they're young, it's to therapy, and then eventually, where does it go after that? Unfortunately, and I hear it all the time, we have all the support as children, all the support that as they become teenagers, and then once they hit 18 to 21, what happens after that?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's something that I feel I want to do more research about. I want to see where can we improve, right? And I think it needs to be kind of still in the conversation of how can we support adults with
Yeah.
those setbacks.
So one of the things that I did with the parents of these students that were working with me is we would always make sure that I know that the parents were raising their child to leave them. That's the goal. That's
Right.
every parent's goal, is to make sure that they're doing that. And the grown child can actually live on their own. So one of the conversations I had with one of the moms was, she said, well, I said, does he have a wallet? Does he know how to handle money? Does he know how to, if he doesn't have a driver's license, can he ride the bus? Can he ride the train? Are you teaching him how to do these things? And she said, oh no, she was super afraid to have them. I said, then you will have a child that will end up not knowing how to live without somebody taking care of them. You have to teach your child how to do this. Now, keep in mind, he's a senior in high school when he was working with me. And so we would have him get on the train. They lived in Sanford. and he would take the Sunrail down to where I was. I would go and meet him at Sunrail, so we know and he would text his mom and say, okay, I'm on the train. I got off at the right place. Isabella's here. And then we walked to the building. And one of the things that I had, and I didn't know if this was effective or not, but do you remember the movie that Sandra Bullock was in, Blindside?
Yes.
Yeah. And so she would go over and tell that to the football player. She said, you see this person? That is your brother. Do you see this person? This and this and this. And so I borrowed from there. And I said, okay, name a person. I said, your job is to get me across the street. You have to get me across the street and make sure you are looking both ways for cars. You have to do that for me, and you have to do that for you. And once I said that to the person, they sat there and they went, okay, they paid attention. And that was the trigger. And so the mom had asked me, do I think that the grown child would be able to do that and take care of themselves? I said, I believe that person can take care of you if you would allow them to come out of the box.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had seen different things like that with all of the people that I worked with. I had one student that worked with me, and he could only move his hands, and he was a graphic designer, and that's all he could do. But he was in a wheelchair. He had so many things going wrong with him. But he was always happy. His outlook was positive. He was very productive in the amount of work that he could do based on all of the challenges that he had. So again, as an employer, and I'm speaking to employers right now, you have to realize that you could have a most amazing employee with you, and you have to allow them they may take longer. You have to be okay with that, because what you're creating is a workplace and a reputation for your company that's priceless.
Right.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm super
Oh,
passionate
me too.
about it.
And it's great to hear because in the scenario of your student and the train and encouraging the parent, that goes such a long way.
Yeah.
And that is a huge part of what we do as well. Right? Behavior analysts, we work very closely with the families, with the parents, with the caregivers, because, unfortunately, we might get a family who feels hopeless.
Yeah.
They get a diagnosis, they feel hopeless. And so our jobs are to provide that encouragement, to provide the support, to provide the background and the progress that gives them that hope, that gives them that confidence that they can carry over all of these trainings and these skills, and they can do them across settings. And I'm telling you, the smallest feats just bring so much joy and so much,
it's a huge accomplishment.
It's huge. So for your student to exhibit that, right, to take you across that street, and for mom to know, oh wow, I didn't know he could do that, and I don't blame her. She's scared, right? She probably feels that sense of, if I relinquish a little bit of control,
me.
Of course,
she trusted me, and that was the thing that's super important.
Yeah,
right? You have to have
absolutely,
trust.
absolutely. That is just the number one thing, is to build that rapport, and then you kind of were that navigator, and giving her a little bit of, oh wow, like sometimes it just takes a parent to see, oh wow, they can do that. I didn't realize that, right? I don't think they intentionally try and hold their children
they're
back,
just
but
being a protective
sometimes
parent.
absolutely. And so, like, in the eyes of an employer, I think, just like I have a new employee, I want to know what they want to improve on, what are their goals, how do they like to learn, all of those things, because I need to know my employee, how they're going to be the most effective. And that goes for anybody. So you have an individual who physically has some setbacks, but are they able to do the job that they signed up to do and that you need them to do? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Why do the other setbacks matter? And if there are some barriers, like, having the time, like you said, maybe they can't do it as quickly as you need them to, or whatever the case may be, then being very candid about what those things are, and is the position you're offering able to accommodate any of those things? If they are, then why not?
Yeah.
Right?
So we have to take a break just for our sponsor, Transcend Network, and we'll be right back.
Transcend Network helps early stage startup founders find product market fit through weekly experiments, receive fundraising support, and build a global founder investor network for EdTech and the future of work technologies. The Intern Whisperer is affiliated with Employers for Change, and we thank Transcend Network for being a sponsor of our show.
And we're back to the second half of our show where we talk about the future of work in 2030, what it's going to look like. So we've been talking a lot about things that from the previous that have carried over here. But what are your thoughts about mental health analysis through apps, doing things without the actual human interface? What are your thoughts about that?
Personally,
Sure. Kara.
I am just I need to feel, touch,
Yes.
sensory, visual, right? But I feel like, again, it's increasing the accessibility for, anybody who has a phone can sit and feel like they have support, right? I think that's important, is that sense of that it's reaching more people, that, whether it be a recording, whether it be a meditation app, whether it be something that is a somewhat of a guide, right? And it gives step by step. I think knowledge is power, right? And so individuals who feel like they need additional support and maybe they don't have the means to go and get therapy, but they find an app that gives them a little bit more knowledge about just, just insight on their own behaviors, or maybe just even insight on emotions, and just gaining a little bit more knowledge about that. I don't personally, I'm trying to think, do I personally have any apps that I've been using?
So
No.
I don't have any, but I feel like what those apps, well, I know that there are some apps where people can talk to a therapist through a phone, and I just want to make sure, like, okay, you're recording those sessions,
Yeah,
and how are you protecting the patient
for
through
sure.
those,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's a good
And
point.
then, if it's video, like, are you vetting these therapists out so that they're really real therapists? Because that's my concerns. Those would be my
Absolutely,
ethics
yeah.
concerns, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, of course, if you're going to take, take something like that seriously, you have to do your research, right? And make sure that it is a trained, accredited professional. And unfortunately, there's just always going to be those pros and cons, right? I'll listen to a different podcast and they'll say, and you'll put a little asterisk and say, well, I'm not a medical professional, but this is what I think. This is what I think my diagnosis is. And like that, unfortunately, people, I think, sometimes are a little too comfortable to kind of self-diagnose, or they have those conversations just based on YouTube videos, based on the TikTok psychologist who talks about, these are the symptoms and this is maybe what you have. It's just, there's always going to be that fine line, right? But I think COVID just made such a big impact, and it opened doors for just trying to reach more to individuals who, can't go and don't have the time to drive, 30, 40 minutes maybe to go to an office to see. It just really, I think, is about the reach and about accessing more people. And I'm hoping that the quality doesn't suffer because of these apps, or because of, online therapy or things like that. But it really is about doing your research and making sure. And it's so personal, it's so personal. I always have heard that you typically have to shop around for,
Right.
What's best for you or the individual who you're getting services from. So it's definitely something that shouldn't be rushed. It's a whole process, and just making sure that it's effective for you.
So I had this guest on my show. He was third week of January. His name is Johnny Crowder, and he is the founder of Cope Notes. Now, I met him at an Amigo event years back, and he was just going through college. And he's open about it. It was on the show. He's diagnosed with schizophrenia. He had attempted suicide, all of this is open book information. He has a very strong faith in Christ, so he's very open about that. He's a musician. He created this app called Cope Notes, and it's a daily affirmation that goes to whoever signs up. You sign up with your phone number, and then you get something every day, something to journal about, something to watch, a podcast, if you will, to listen to, or maybe a TED Talk, but different ways that you can feel better about
Yeah.
yourself. I found that really interesting because I said, well, what do you do if it's somebody that could harm themselves? And he said, well, we do have information that goes out and says, if you feel that you're going to harm yourself, you need to call 911. And I found that interesting that here he is, somebody with all of these, we would say, cards stacked against him, and he created a solution to help not only him, but so many others
Right.
that may not have shared that. So I guess the point of all of that is technology can do great things like what Johnny's doing, or it can do something that, if it's not managed well, it could be hurtful.
Absolutely. I actually reposted something the other day that said, I'm thankful to have grown up in a world without the internet. But am I thankful for it? Has so much good, so much, growth become because of it? Of course, yes. But anything too much or irresponsibly is going to be damaging, right? So look at that. Somebody who, from his own experience, wanted to do something for others. And I mean, just how many times do people say, write it down, journal? Because it can be therapeutic for many people. Even you have these strong feelings and strong emotions, and sometimes it's not healthy to let them out on another individual, right? So just to write it down doesn't, when we're angry and we want to express ourselves, sometimes what we want to say out loud is what we feel our truth is, and what is, something that individuals say is don't bottle it up because it will outburst. So hey, write it down. The old say, like the old suggestion, write it down, crumple it up, throw it in the trash. No one has to get hurt. Write the text, don't send it, right? Write the email, don't send it, delete it, but let it out. So if that's an avenue that he created for individuals to express themselves and as their own form of kind of release, that's great. And that is why technology can be so helpful and can be beneficial. But when it goes too far is when it becomes damaging for individuals. And, we see it unfortunately a lot, but we also see a lot of good.
Well, you touched on ethical dilemmas then. That was one of my questions. Ethical dilemmas. What do you think that could possibly happen? And have you seen Black Mirror?
No.
Okay. It's on Netflix.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. It raises a lot of questions, and it's centered around mental health also, but it's things of the future, augmented reality, virtual reality, taking consciousness and putting it into other things or beings, and just so many, what would be the word I would choose? So many possibilities of how things can go wrong. And so it's finding that balance. And I think that the takeaway from COVID is that a lot of people realized how, I would say, what it felt like to be locked up.
Yeah.
Like a prisoner. And they didn't deal with it very well. Right. So, we find other ways of handling that and keeping balance in life. I think that's one of the best things that came out of COVID is the need to actually be more open about mental wellness and mental health.
Absolutely. It's funny it's called Black Mirror because when I think of COVID and that time in our lives, it did give us a lot of time for reflection, as a mirror would, right? We can't go against human nature. We are social beings.
Yeah.
So does that mean social beings doesn't mean that it doesn't talk about affection. So, someone says, oh, I'm not that sociable. We are sociable beings. Like we have to interact in some way. Doesn't mean affection, hugging and this and that. That doesn't mean that. That doesn't even mean having to chat as much, right? I know in a previous podcast of yours, I was listening and you talked a little bit about being outgoing versus more
Introverted versus,
introverted.
yeah.
Right. And so some individuals experience that time in COVID and said, oh, it was a time for me to just relax. It was a time for me to reflect on myself. And they had a positive experience. But many people felt that locked in, felt that, wow, everything is stripped away from me. It's like everything getting robbed of you. And especially in our country, a lot of individuals were just on the go all the time, always have somewhere to go, always have somewhere to be. And unfortunately, though, I think it did turn people more to turn to social media, to go online. And again, too much of one thing can be damaging to us.
Yeah. For me, it was very depressing.
Yeah.
And it's not because, and I'm not a big person on social media, and it didn't drive me there either. But I get my energy from being around people.
Right.
And I don't even have to have the conversation with them. I just like being in a room with people. So when I couldn't do that, and I'm in a situation where it's just me, I'm just going, I really got super depressed.
Right.
And I was asking, because I worked out of Starter Studio, I said, can I just go in there and just work out of there? It's fine. There's nobody else there. I'll be totally protected.
Yeah.
I just need to be able to get out of and I need the separation of work from home.
Yeah.
Like I really need that. So I know we kind of went all over the place with that, but I don't know. I think a lot of individuals that are, I don't know, I'm only basing it on a few that are autistic, they seem to like to be by themselves more. Would that be a safe assumption that I'm making or not?
I don't think, to be honest, no.
Okay.
I have some individuals who love to be in groups, who love to be with other people. So again, that's just something that we have to understand, that it is so individualistic.
Yeah.
This population, again, it's a spectrum. I have kiddos who some people may label it as low functioning versus high functioning. Again, I think what's important is that if you have an individual in your life who has autism and they are open about speaking about it, it is important to build that rapport, allow them to feel support from you, and ask them the questions if they are open. Again, we don't want to be too intrusive, right? We don't want to sit there and say, tell me this, tell me that. Again, it's a personal experience, and it's also experience that the family is involved with. So I think I have met incredibly social individuals who have autism. So it really depends on the person. It is extremely individualistic. And if another carry away that, individuals, employers, whoever's listening can take away is that we cannot take that label and make these very specific, assumptions about them based off of a Google search of what are the typical symptoms, right, of autism. It's just there's just so many different experiences I've had.
You are absolutely right. I know that to be true because I had seen during COVID that there were 2 people that were graduating from college that were nonverbal autistic. And I went, I did not know that. I went, how is that possible? So I don't understand how maybe it's that they don't speak or they don't know how to speak, but they can read, they can write intelligently. They were the valedictorian of the class, but they don't speak. Do you have any expertise in that area too?
Well, when we have clients and they are nonverbal, so what the communication training then is essential, right? How are they communicating then? And communication is not only verbal, not only vocal. So when we say verbal behavior in ABA, what we're looking at are what are the avenues of communication: gestures, even eye contact, right? Even pointing. We have a system that's called PEX. So you might see like an iPad converted into a communication device. We have small pictures, which are the PEX, right? You might see a book with a bunch of different pictures, and we may choose the avenue of to teach PEX, where a child will take a photo, give it to you, and it'll have the image or the item that they are desiring in the moment. So I'm not sure. I mean, I would love to see a little bit of background from that individual who graduated and
Yeah, they wrote,
who's nonverbal.
one
That's
graduated
interesting.
from my school, Rollins College,
Uh-huh.
and she submitted all of the papers. She did
Yeah.
all of those things. Apparently, did a PowerPoint. I'm kind of filling in some of the gaps there
Yeah.
because I know what is required to graduate from the school.
Right.
So when she was doing the valedictorian speech, she wrote it out and somebody else read it, is how
Wow.
that was handled.
Wow.
So super, I'll find it. I'll send it to
Yeah,
you.
I'm just interested to
on
kind of see the
LinkedIn.
background. Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's just so amazing. That goes to show that again, right? Like just the barrier of her not being able to communicate vocally does not stop her from being able to accomplish, that level of mastery of other skills.
Mhm.
And so wow, that's amazing to hear that. It just gives other people another perspective on, just because they have these barriers, they're totally capable in so many other ways.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's so hard to believe. We're at the end. So what is the best mentoring advice that you want to share with our listeners?
I think it is to always remember that you don't have to know all the answers. So if you don't have an answer for an individual, it is the best model to be very candid about that.
Mhm.
And especially as a leader of a corporation, of a business, whatever it is, we are always learning, and that is something that I feel is very important, to be a model and always a student as well as a teacher, right? Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good. So how can people find you, find the company that you work with?
Mhm.
How do we find you?
Yes. So we have a Instagram. It is at ABA Alliance. We have a Facebook that is ABA Alliance Therapy. My personal social is at Monica Jared, MonicAyared. And we are also just looking for passionate individuals. So if you're in Orlando and you're interested in ABA, go ahead and you can email me at monica@abaalliance.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This
Thank
has been a
you.
great show. I am sure our listeners are going to just really like this a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to our sponsor, Cat 5 Studios. Thank you to our production team, producer and editor Josue Gonzalez, and music by Sophie Lloyd. Visit Employers for Change at www.e4c.tech to learn how you can create real diversity and inclusion culture while skilling your people for the future of work. Thank you for supporting the Intern Whisperer by subscribing to us on Podbean, our Employers for Change YouTube channel, or streaming from your favorite podcast channel.